everyone and welcome back to my channel Beth Chats Books. Now today's video is going to be a catch up on some recent reads. I've decided that for the Goodreads summer readathon I'm going to do a few separate videos, maybe 2 to 3 of separate wrap-ups regarding that. So I've recently come back from my holiday and there was 4 books that are on my Goodreads readathon TBR that I did read on holiday in that week, so I'm going to do a kind of holiday wrap-up / part 1 of my Goodreads summer readathon wrap-up, and then later on in the next coming weeks when I finish the rest of my pile of to be read for that, I will do separate videos. So they're all coming, but for now I'm just going to allow you guys to kind of have a catch-up on the books I've been reading since we last had a recent reads video. The first book I'm going to discuss is The Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy. Now this book I gave 4 out of 5 stars. Sorry, I'm just going to move my little paper because I decided to jot a few things down to make this video a little bit quicker than usual. So this book is kind of set in India, in Old Delhi, and it follows our 2 main characters, which are Anjum and Tilo. So Anjum lives in a community on the outskirts of Old Delhi with individuals which we would call nowadays transgender. So when he was younger he knew quite early on that he wanted to be a woman, and then with his family he tried to get some surgery and procedures done that didn't really work out very well. So throughout the book they mention how he almost has a 2-toned voice because the procedures weren't successful. So those people kind of were a little bit isolated and outcast from society, and they have set up near a graveyard. They basically set up a community, and then one day Anjum finds a orphan and he kind of adopts this little girl and brings her into the community. Then a later day he finds, during protests and other things, another little girl, and the little girl goes missing, and Tilo is the woman who takes the child, and then these 2 lives kind of get interconnected, and in the end it kind of results in a friendship and a lot of adventures. Tilo has another few characters she introduces in this book that are connected to her, a few male characters, but overall it focuses on those 2, and it's in the background of things like sterilisation and political unrest in India, as well as the caste systems and the fact that Muslim and Hindu communities are committing acts of violence against one another. So there's lots of richness in this book. I really enjoyed the reading experience when I read it, and I think the writing was really beautiful. I know a lot of people have said that her first book, The God of Small Things, was really, really good, and that there has been a bit of a gap between that one coming out and this one. So I really want to get to A God of Small Things and see if I enjoy that. But if any of that sounds remotely interesting to you, then I'm sure you'll enjoy this book. And then the next one I read was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. That's currently at my boyfriend's flat, so I haven't got that to hand, so I'm just going to put an image here. So I give this 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely adored the book. I managed to read it in one sitting or so. This is set in 1959 in Kansas, and it is a non-fiction novel, as Truman Capote likes to call it, focused around the Clutter family murders. So the Clutter family were quite well known in Kansas at the time, and it is a mum, a dad, a brother and a sister, and there's 2 other daughters that live within the Clutter household, but they have moved out and remarried. So it just focuses on those 4, and the community wake up one Sunday to discover that they've been brutally murdered in their homes. Some of the family members have been tied up, others have been mutilated, and they've all been killed in different rooms around the house. So then the story kind of moves from a kind of fictionalised account of what the individual characters of the house were like, their personalities, how the community received them, and then after their death it focuses on the 2 murderers, Perry Smith and Dick Hitchcock, and from their perspective how they went on the run, why they committed the murder, how their time in prison for petty theft and other things allowed them to meet each other, to meet other characters, and propelled them into this wild goose chase to go and find this Clutter family who they didn't know previously and commit such a crime. So it's fictionalised from how they felt about the murders all the way through to their capture and their hanging for the crime, because in Kansas at this time hanging was still, and the death penalty was still legalised. So I found it really, really interesting. I love the idea that it's kind of non-fiction, it's informative, it's based on true crime. And this is really the grandfather of true crime. This has really propelled that kind of sick, morbid fascination we now all have all over the world with crime, and it's particularly true crime. I absolutely adored that, because anything to do with true crime I really, really love. But I love the psychological thriller element of that, and also the fact that because it's kind of a novel, and Truman Capote did a lot of research for this book, but ultimately he is trying to get inside the psyche and the characters of the two murderers and figure out what they would feel. I believe he did interview them as well, or he did get first-hand accounts, maybe written or verbal, off other individuals. So I know he did a lot of research for it, but the idea that he is getting into the shoes of those people, and we get this really human element from that, about how they would cope with being on death row, and how they both came to commit the crimes and under these different circumstances. It's just so rich with all those interesting stuff, and I really like this concept of a non-fiction novel. I love the true crime elements, but I love the storytelling element of this. It's just so captivating. No wonder it's a classic, and it has encouraged me to try more Capote. So there's that one. And then the next one after that I read was The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. So I know that Heather Morris met the main character, which is Lael, and that after his wife died, I believe she lives in Australia or New Zealand, I can't remember where now, and she went and met him, and he slowly developed a friendship with her that allowed her to kind of fictionalise his story. So he told her segments of his time in World War II in the Auschwitz camp, and how he met his wife Gita, who was also there during the camp. So it's really lovely, because it's a love story between Lael and Gita, and they both kind of are surviving these really harsh conditions, but there's that optimism and hope that they're falling blindly in love with each other. And obviously, no spoilers, but they managed to get out, because this is obviously Lael retelling the story now that his wife is gone to Heather Morris, who then felt compelled to write a kind of fictionalised account of it. It is beautiful, it is so moving. I loved the perspective of, because obviously he becomes the tattooist of Auschwitz, and he kind of tattoos all the different numbers of all the hundreds of people, thousands of people that ended up over the years entering the camp. It's obviously very graphic. If you've ever read any fictionalised accounts or non-fiction accounts of the time of Auschwitz, obviously there was very, very disturbing imagery within this book, and it was very hard-hitting, but it was so beautifully written. And I loved as well this element that this was kind of based on a true love story, and that it's a completely unique angle on the Auschwitz story, that we really are having a different spin with this whole love story than just the survival element. So I really, really enjoyed that, and obviously it's blown up all over BookTube, and if you haven't read it, I think you should go ahead and read it, because it's very easy to get through, and this is a similar book that you can read in really one sitting or so. Then the next one after that was A Girl in Winter by Philip Larkin. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, because even now I can't really remember much about it. I think it goes through a summer and a winter. So the main character was Catherine Lind, and it's set in 1943. But upon reflection, I've gone through my notes, because I have a notebook where I write things down, and I went over to Goodreads, and then I did a bit of research before this video, and I can't really remember very much what it was about. I think it's to do with, she worked in a library, and she kind of had this weird relationship. She's an American that's come over to live in England, and she had this relationship with the family, a British family over there, because a few years back she was on a kind of exchange, and she managed to come over and stay with a pen pal and live with his family for a week. And then it kind of, as she's moving forward, she finds out that this officer, this British man, is now working as an officer, and he's got time off, and she sent a letter to the family, who then said that he would try and meet her now that he knows she's in England all these years later. And then the story kind of backtracks to when she was staying that summer with them, and his relationship to her and his sister's relationship to her, and how she kind of discovers that the man that's invited her, this pen pal of hers, a teenager at the time, but he's a man in the modern day setting, didn't really invite her, that the sister invited her, and it had promise of this kind of family saga-esque story that just didn't materialise. I'm trying to go through the recesses of my mind and see if I can really remember how I felt or what really happened, but there was no reveal. I feel like there's a kind of anticlimactic ending and I can't really determine what happened, and I feel like that's why I gave it a 3-star, because the ending must have been rather deflating for me if I cannot really conclude what happened at the end. So I know that Philip Larkin is a lot more famous for his poetry, and I think I found this at a bookshop, an Oxfam. I wanted to give it a go and see what he was like as a novel writer. It wasn't particularly brilliant, it didn't blow me away, and maybe I'll just stick to his poetry in the future. I know he has written a few other books, and I know this was meant to be almost a complimentary second book to a first one. So maybe I should try and go back and read the first one and see if that helps bring any context for this one. But my personal opinion is you're not wasting any time if you skip his novels and just enjoy his poetry. And there's that one. So then the next one is Brighton Rock by Graham Greene. So this is a kind of modern classic. So this is set in the 30s in Brighton in the UK, and it follows Pinky, who's a gang member. So he becomes the head of a gang because the previous predecessor was stabbed in one of the train stations. I think it was shot or stabbed, I can't remember now, due to the fact that he was cornered by a rival gang, and obviously with the inner politics of the different gangs he was assassinated, murdered, however you want to call it. And so Pinky has now took the responsibility of being the new leader of the opposite gang. And so the novel starts with he has managed to curtail and find Fred Lale, who we don't really know much context of at the very beginning, but he is on the hit list of Pinky's gang, and they manage at the beginning of the novel to murder him. But during that brief interlude before he's murdered, he meets a character called Ida, and Ida is kind of a singer, swinger, prostitute. We kind of know that she spends a lot of time with men and they wine and dine her and she sleeps with them, and she kind of makes her money that way. And so he briefly meets Ida as a way to secure himself against the gang imposing on him and getting him and murdering him. And she briefly goes to the toilet, and within this interlude he's murdered. And then so she spends the rest of the novel trying to hunt down Pinky and basically get justice for this character Fred. So as we get further on in the novel, we realise that Pinky starts a relationship with another individual, with a woman. She's a waitress at one of the Brighton cafes, and she, by accident, ends up seeing some information that really does put Pinky's gang very much at the scene of the crime. So it becomes really important evidence that she sees that basically puts Pinky's gang right there at the scene of the crime and basically exposes them as the murderers of Fred. And she doesn't really realise at the time that she's witness to this, but Pinky does. So then he creates this romance kind of storyline with her and eventually gets her to marry him so that she can not be able to legally testify against him when or if this all comes to light. So this obviously slowly starts unravelling, and Ida starts getting very involved and finds out who Pinky is and keeps kind of encroaching on his relationship with this woman, trying to warn this woman against Pinky, and she gets involved with the gang members and trying to sway them, and it all kind of comes to a head. So at the time of reading it, I really didn't enjoy the characters. Pinky is really detestable and loathsome, and obviously we don't have any sympathy for him. We don't connect with Fred because he's killed at the very beginning, and so we're kind of made to feel a little bit frustrated that we don't know his context, we didn't know who he was. so we can't really empathise with his death. Also then, Ida doesn't know much about him, so as we get further on in the novel, some of her male companions then chastise her and say, how have you got this sense of justice? You didn't really know this man. And we know that she's out for more of the excitement of trying to catch a killer than she is about justice for Fred or any meaningful relationship. So it kind of ends up meaning that the whole situation isn't really easy for us as a reader to connect with, so we become a little bit detached to all the surroundings. And for me, when I become detached from a book, it's never really going to be higher than a 3 stars for me, because I've not invested in what the ending is. And so it was more well written and more engaging, for example, than A Girl in Winter, but it wasn't a blow away kind of book for me. It wasn't one that was like, wow, this is really, really phenomenal, which obviously I had that experience with in Cold Blood, which is a similar kind of classic genre. So I would have to give it 3 out of 5 stars. But it's well worth a read. It is a classic for a reason. And then the next one was 3 Day Road by Joseph Boyden. Now, I ended up DNFing this book actually, so I got about halfway through and it's currently still at my boyfriend's flat, and he really wants me to get rid of it because he said, if you're not going to read it, what are you going to do with it? And so I think it will be going to a charity shop pretty soon, and I will be doing an unhaul video before I take anything to the Oxfams or libraries or anything like that, so you'll all be able to see them. But anyway, I'm getting rid of this book because I just really didn't connect with the characters. So it's meant to be set in Canada, and Xavier and Elijah are kind of native Canadians. They're Indigenous and they live on the outskirts of Toronto in the kind of wilderness, and they've been raised by Niska, who is Xavier's aunt, and she's kind of raised them in the ways of her tribe. She's the last kind of living relative connection to her Indigenous tribe, which was previously headed by her father, but eventually it disintegrated because the Indigenous tribe ended up leaving the area and moving into Toronto, and then generations past have settled there. But she's determined to not live that way. So we sometimes have flashbacks to how she used to live her life, and she once got connected with an individual French man who was kind of invading the area. She had this fling and that ended quite bitterly. And then we also have the different accounts of Xavier and Elijah when they are conscripted up in World War I to fight, and they go to Belgium and France, and we kind of learn about the war trauma they suffer there and how brutal war is. And obviously if you've read a World War novel, you know what I'm talking about, the experience of the trenches, and then how the experience of war really gets to them. So Elijah becomes a lot more natural at killing, and all the skills that they've learned from their Indigenous upbringing has really helped them with using guns and other things like that. So that's where I got up to, but I kind of felt like the wheels fell off the train as such for me, that the plot ended up being such that I was halfway through and I kind of felt like I'd kind of grasped the concept of where this was all going to go. And it's a lot more of a reflective novel than it is a plot-driven novel, so it's quite difficult to be able to find a cohesive and a structured ending. So I kind of just lost interest because it was paragraphs and paragraphs of similar things, of the trench experience, of the Indigenous experience, which isn't not interesting, but it was just not gripping enough for me. So I was just not sold on that, and I wasn't willing to put myself through another 200 pages when it was all just starting to conglomerate into one big blech of a lot of descriptive text, which for me was just not really engaging. I don't mind descriptions of landscapes or descriptions of war, but there was no foreseeable plot driving it forward for me, unfortunately. And then the next one after that was Milkman by Anna Burns, which I gave 5 stars. So this is set in the Troubles era of Northern Ireland, and all of the characters aren't really named. So our main protagonist, as I'll call her, she is living in Northern Ireland where gossip rules out. So there is an insinuation from the community that she's having a relationship with a man called the Milkman, who has infamous connections to kind of IRA, political organisations, and the community have assumed she's having a relationship with him. Now, there's some really insidious, horrible elements of the book where he's kind of grooming her and she's powerless to say anything because the rest of the community have decided that she's entered into this relationship, and her mum's furious with her because the community now look down upon her as reflection. And it's really powerful how it depicts that he's grooming her and she's got nobody to talk to. Nobody believes her. She even tells her friend, one of her closest friends, in a bar at one point of the novel, and she's undermined by everybody. They almost either ridicule her about it or they chastise her for this relationship that she's not consented to. She's only 18 in the novel, so it's powerful how isolated she feels about this and how terrifying it is, and how she hasn't got a support network. She has a boyfriend in the novel, but then things turn sour with that, which I will not ruin. But I found all the different things so interesting. So the socio-political spectrum of the novel and how gossip kind of is a really predominant force within the community. I loved the politics. I like the issues set in Northern Ireland. There was a few mentions of the kind of religious elements as well. And there were some really interesting bits of the book. For example, this concept of other people and how you can make people an outsider, and everybody had a kind of nickname. So her nickname's almost to do with the fact that she likes walking and reading at the same time, which makes her very other, and they isolate her for that. And other people, for example, one man is called the man who doesn't love anyone, which is actually not true at all, but everybody has to fit into these little boxes, and I found that really fascinating. I found the book really engaging. Now, this whole stream of consciousness has been a bit controversial because some people have found that really difficult to get into as a writing style. I didn't actually even acknowledge reading the book that was kind of how it was written. I was just really fully engaged in the characters, and it has reiterated for me that as long as I can connect with the characters and the overall plot and world, that things like structure and form don't seem to matter as significantly to me as I previously thought they have. So it's a very quick read once you get into it, and once you get into the writing style, so many rich and important things to say, and I really did enjoy the reading experience. And then the final book I want to talk about is Hot Water Music by Charles Blavatsky. Now, I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. So this is kind of set in the 60s in America, and it deals with the lowest forms of depravity. So it deals with a lot of short stories around writers, and a lot of the stories kind of connect to the same name. So it's almost like the same writer at some instances, but the other characters are a little bit different in each story. It deals with affairs, sexual appetites, excessive drinking, excessive drug use, debauchery, violence, really low forms of excess in this short story collection. So it deals with lots of these different things. The stories got really rather repetitive, and they dealt with similar things: drinking to excess, having affairs. It didn't really glamorise the writing life in this period, and so it just did get a bit repetitive. Overall, he was hammering that point very well, but without anything to kind of break up this short story collection. It was a bit stodgy getting through, and it didn't really enlighten me very much more to anything else that I needed to know. So for fans of him, it's probably very interesting to read these short stories collection. But as not really ever previously reading anything from him, I didn't have anything to scratch it up to. However, if this is his main style, and a lot of his short stories and his prose are all very similar, then I don't think I'll get on with him as much as I thought I would. But there we go, I read that collection. So they're all the books I want to talk about today. Obviously, like I said, I will be talking about some of the other books I read over my holidays in future videos, and I will eventually do my unhaul videos when I start to get rid of some of my read books. But thank you guys so much for watching. Before I go, I just want to let you guys know that I think about 2 weeks ago, sometime around this month is my 2nd year anniversary on BookTube, so if you would like me to do anything to celebrate that with you guys, for example a Q&A or anything else like that, please put a comment in the comment section down below and we can discuss a way that I can celebrate it before the end of this month with you guys. But that's everything. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new video. Bye now!